Business with a servant's heart. Welcome to the podcast. Steve Ramona. Inspiration, motivation takes. Listen to the podcast. Steve Ramona. We're all about to talk about life. Our guests will share their life story. We want you to success in life and business. We're ready and we will start shortly. We're gonna talk about life. We're going to speak on business. You're gonna shine bright. We are going to witness. Business with a servant's heart. With host Steve Ramona ready. Inspiration, education talks. Listen to the podcast. Steve Ramona.
Welcome, everyone, to Doing Business with a Servant's Heart podcast. I'm your host, Steve Ramona. I am so thrilled to have you join us today. This podcast is dedicated to exploring the idea of doing business and living life with a purpose, serving others, and yes, achieving success. We're going to talk generosity today, too, and that's a big component of this. We believe that when we approach our work and our lives with a servant's heart and being generous, we can truly make a difference. We created this show for you because we want everyone to be motivated, inspired, and educated to make an impact in your world, whether you're an entrepreneur, business owner, community leader, or simply someone that wants to bring purpose in your daily life. We're here to support you at this podcast. While listening to this incredible show about generosity, I want you to think about how you're going to serve today and what impact you'll create today with that service. And one of those impacts would be generosity. I keep bringing that up. You can tell the theme of this podcast is going to be fun. Today's episode is proudly sponsored by our phenomenal partner, Pantheon Alliance. Imagine being part of an exclusive community of high-income, successful business owners and entrepreneurs from very diverse industries, building a thought leader platform and also changing the world by making a huge impact by putting our networks together. If you have any questions about Pantheon Alliance, please reach out. I'll get you more information. With that being said, impact and service is a big part of this podcast. But my guest is going to talk about generosity. That's the act of service that you can KPI. Are you generous with your time? You're generous with your resources, generous with your money. Pick one of those. You don't have to be all three. You don't have to give $1 million. You don't have it. You can be generous by just your time and be very successful. Bob, welcome to our incredible show.
Steve, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to join you and talk a little bit about generosity and all the things that it helps our businesses and our lives do.
I want to talk about 9/11, not 9/11, the date, the catastrophic event that happened. How did that shape your outlook in life and shape generosity?
Well, I have an interesting experience with 9/11. I think a lot of people who are alive during that time remember exactly what happened, and it's certainly a time in my life that was pivotal into what I focus on in my life to this day. So I can take you all the way back to that period of time and provide you all kinds of details. But to answer your question in short, before we go into those details, 9/11 taught me something about giving that I don't think any other event in our world's history could have.
I love it. Let's get into it. I love to learn more.
Sure. Well, when I was 18, should you start a story with a question? I don't know, but I'm going to do that. So Steve and anyone out there listening, did anyone think that they were invincible when they were 18 years old? So Steve, did you feel that way? Maybe?
Absolutely.
Most people will say yes to that question. And I kind of felt that way. And I was going off to college, an 18-year-old freshman, had a chance to play football up in New York. I grew up in South Florida, was actually born in New York, moved down, but I wanted an opportunity to go back to New York where my roots were, spend more time with my cousins, play ball, hopefully get an education. I think that was on my parents' list. And I had all these things going for me. I thought I was tackling the world by myself. And believe me, there's nothing wrong with confidence, but pretty quickly I learned that you can't do life by yourself. And ultimately, in a very short period of time, I went from feeling like I was this not only physically invincible athlete, but I felt like I could just take down anything mentally. And I didn't really have much that would provide me with resistance. And so I had what I thought was a groin injury. Now, the first shot at my confidence was a groin injury. My second question for you, Steve, is if you've ever pulled a muscle down there, well, first of all, have you? And if you did, isn't it extremely debilitating?
Extremely.
I mean, you can't stand, you can't sit, walk, sit up, turn around. I'm sitting in a swiveling chair right now. If I try to do that with a pulled groin muscle, I don't think I'd be able to move. So the reason why this is significant is because my head trainer in college was giving me a hard time that I wasn't getting back on the field. In fact, speaking of swiveling chairs, I was doing this exercise in the training room for a couple of weeks on end, where I would shimmy across the room. And if you picture me dodging people in the morning, like in a training room at 6 o'clock in the morning before a training camp practice, it's like there's hundreds of people there. There's a million things going on. And I think part of the exercise was just dodging these people. But it was so painful and I couldn't move. And one day the trainer stands up on this little box in the middle of in the training room, and he's not a big guy. And in order to get everyone's attention, he would have to cup his hands and scream. And he would have to yell out for whoever he was trying to get their attention. And it just seemed like that on that moment, for whatever reason, it got dead silent and everyone in the room could hear. And this might be the only part of the story, or this will definitely be the only part of the story that has any chance of me exaggerating anything. But it just felt to me like he was calling me out in front of all of my new teammates and coaches and trainers as the freshman. And he said, Bobby, they called me Bobby at the time, you need to be back out on the field, quit being a weakling. And I'm like, now we got this trainer. He's like all of 5'5", 120 pounds, soaking wet, calling me out in front of my team. I mean, honestly, I felt like I went from invincible to complete loser in a really, really short period of time. And you can imagine what kind of shot this was to my ego. Either way, he's like, I spoke with him a little bit later and he said, you know what, Bobby, if you're not feeling any better and this is legitimately a problem, I'm sending you to the doctor. And I said, all right, send me to the doctor because I want to get better. So over the next couple of weeks, I had a series of tests, MRIs, CAT scans, ultrasounds, sonograms, you name it, every test in the book. And I'm an 18-year-old kid, technically an adult, driving around New York, going to all these doctors' offices and radiology departments, filling out paperwork, answering questions that I don't even know. I mean, I know nothing about insurance and medical history, any of that. And it was just a drag. I mean, it was such a mental drag on what was going on. But I'll never forget on the final day, or the day of what I thought was going to be my final test, my parents had planned on coming up to New York to see my first ever college football game. Now, we knew I wasn't playing in the game at this point, but they weren't going to cancel the trip. They were still going to come see me. Hadn't been away. I'm an only child, mama's boy, hadn't been away from home that long ever in my life. So I go into this appointment expecting to be there for hours, like all my other appointments and tests that I had done. But the moment I walked in the door, it's like they knew I was coming. It's almost like they had a camera in the parking lot and they were waiting for me to walk in. And I open the door and the receptionist greets me, Bobby, welcome, come right in. And I'm like, come right in. Like what? I could just tell something was wrong. Like normally they don't tell me to come right in. Normally it's here, fill out this, 20 pages worth of paperwork. So I go in, I sit down. The moment I sit down, the doctor walks right in. He sits down at the table and stares me in the eye and says, Bobby, you have cancer. And I said, what? I have cancer? I mean, Steve, my jaw hit the desk. I couldn't believe, I was dead silent. And the only thing I remember him saying after that was, don't panic. We'll hook you up with an oncologist. You're free to go. And I thought to myself, well, first of all, I don't even know how to spell oncologist. What is that? And I'm free to go. Like you made it seem like I'm in a jail or something. And I think there's some significance to that metaphor. I kind of did feel like I was in a jail. So I leave the office and just the divine timing of the next events in life are just incredible. The moment I leave the office, it's a big office. I go out the sliding glass door and the automatic door there in the building, and my phone rings. And it was my mom. And she said, hey, we landed. I was expecting you to be in your appointment. I was going to leave a voicemail, but we're here and we'll meet you at your uncle's house. We were going to meet. That's where my parents were going to be staying, at my uncle's house, and who lives up in New York. And I said, and she goes, but while I have you on the phone, how did the appointment go? And Steve, I mean, I had to tell her what the doctor said. I couldn't lie. And I was like, Mom, well, so about the appointment, and I explained to her what the doctor said. And it was dead silent. but I could just feel her screaming from the other side of the phone. It was the loudest scream of dead silence I've ever experienced in my life. And the only thing I could hear was my dad on the other side. He was in the car with her, and he was saying, Susan, Susan, which is my mom's name, what's going on? Like, even he could tell that I said something devastating to my mom because of her reaction. And so we met back at my uncle's house. Like I said, hadn't seen my parents in a month, shed some tears, said some prayers, kind of looked at each other and was like, well, what are we going to do? So a couple days pass, and my uncle's best friend comes over his house. Now it's Saturday, it was supposed to be the day of my first game, but I didn't travel with the team. It was an away game. And my uncle's best friend comes over his house, and we've never met this guy before. He shows up, and really nice guy. He says hi to my aunt, my uncle, and my uncle says, oh, this is my sister, Susan, and her son and her husband. And he walks directly over to my parents, like a man on a mission, crosses the kitchen where he came in and we were talking, and he puts his hands in his pocket, Steve, and he shoves his keys in my parents' face. I mean, it almost looked like he was punching my dad. I can't even explain it. He shoves his key and he goes, Bob and Susan, I can only imagine what you're going through with your son right now. Take my car. You can use it for as long as you need. And I mean, I don't even know what my parents said, but I thought to myself, I was like, wow, that's probably the most generous thing that someone has ever done for my family and I. And I didn't even know what to say. And the crazy thing is that right after that, he just left. He said, all right, well, I got to run. I'm glad I stopped by. Take the car. I'll catch you all later. And he said goodbye to my aunt and uncle, and he was gone in like 15 minutes. And, we said to my uncle, like, who is this guy? He just comes over to give his car away. And he goes, yeah, that's Tim. He's just a really nice guy. So that was a Saturday. Now to get to the heart of the story, if you felt that it hasn't come up yet, but Tuesday, so 3 days after that, was my second ever college class. I come out of my second ever college class, and I'm sitting in the cafeteria I think I was eating a breakfast burrito, if my memory serves me correctly, and I was watching the news. Now, it was one of those bracket televisions that's hanging from the corner of the wall and the ceiling. Those old school type of tube TVs that you'd see in a public. Now I'm 18. I don't think I ever voluntarily watched the news in my life, no less know what the news station is in New York, a place where I'm new to. And the news is on, and I'm sitting there watching, eating my breakfast. And all of a sudden, they flash to a video of a plane hitting a building. And I said, oh, that's kind of crazy. Let me call my dad. So I called my dad and I said, hey, are you watching the news? A plane just hit a building in Manhattan. And he was like, yeah, that's what a horrible accident. And then we're talking for maybe a minute, Steve, and all of a sudden, bam, another plane hits another tower right next to it. And my dad's like, wait, that's not an accident. And it turns out that was the terrorist attacks on 9/11. So we didn't know it at the time, but my dad's like, you better get back to you better leave, hightail it out of school and come back to your uncle's house. So I got in the car. I definitely didn't finish my breakfast. That breakfast burrito is probably still sitting there on the counter in the cafeteria. And I hopped in the car, and it would typically take me 15 minutes to drive from school to my uncle's. Steve, it took me 9 hours to go from there. Burning towers, remember, I'm in New York, so burning towers look in the distance, traffic, people honking horns, crazy. I subsequently have a master's degree in broadcast journalism. I love radio. I love conversations like this, but I will never, ever listen to 9 straight hours of AM radio again. If there's any radio people out there, that day I listened to 9 straight hours, and it was just riveting. I mean, I heard all of the coverage, everything that was going on, and I ran out of gas in my uncle's neighborhood. Now, thankfully, I didn't run out of gas on the highway. That would have been a disaster. But I ran out of gas in the neighborhood. We pushed my car into the driveway. And I'll never forget my parents just kind of being in a panic. I mean, I thought a few weeks ago I was this invincible 18-year-old kid. Then I thought maybe my life is over. And now that day I was like, maybe the whole world is coming to an end. I mean, it was just a dramatic change. And I'll never forget that my aunt was completely hysterical, because my uncle was supposed to be on business, or was on business, the night before in Denver, and he was supposed to fly back to New York that morning. Well, thankfully, he finally calls us at like 8 p.m. or later. It might have even been later. And he's like, hey guys, I know you're probably panicking, trying to get a hold of me. The phones have been out. I'm fine. My plane was grounded. We never took off. So I didn't fly to New York. And he reassured us that everything was okay with him. And then we were going to hang up the phone and just call it a night. It's just an exhausting night. But then he said, hey, before let you guys go, I just received word that my friend Tim, who you all met on Saturday, was in the tower this morning and he died. And we looked at each other and we couldn't believe it. I mean, here's this guy, Tim, that we just met, just this incredible act of generosity. Like, why did he deserve to be in the tower that morning? And it turns out that Tim worked for Cantor Fitzgerald, which is an investment banking firm, if anyone's familiar. And they were known for being a very generous organization. In fact, they donated office space to my uncle's foundation for cystic fibrosis, which is a respiratory, reproductive, digestive disorder. And they've raised millions of dollars. But if it wasn't for Cantor Fitzgerald and people like Tim, they wouldn't have been there. Now, everyone from Cantor Fitzgerald was in the office that morning. Thankfully, the only person who would have been in the office for the foundation was stuck in the subway, and she ended up escaping. But the stories that she can tell are incredible. But perhaps the greatest story from that day, or at least one of the most moving stories that I would recommend that people check out, is that Howard Lutnick, the CEO and founder of Cantor Fitzgerald, has his press conference after the attacks is one of the most emotional things that you'll ever see. You can YouTube it. He was typically in the office with his whole staff, that hundreds of people every morning at that time. But that was the one day that for some reason he had to take his kid to school. And as the story goes, he was one of the people that was running down the road there after the plane hit because he was on his way into the office. So he lost his whole staff. This guy worked his whole life to build this company. And the survivor's guilt must be amazing. Either way, watch that story and YouTube it. And the whole thing makes me wonder and thought, at least at the time, is like, why are some people such giving people? And why do we not know when our last opportunity to be generous would be? And Tim was known for saying something to the effect of, you know how they say YOLO, or you only live once, or FOMO, fear of missing out? He would say something to the effect of, you never know when your last opportunity to be generous will be. And Steve, I like to think that, well, not even I like to think, I know for a fact that our family, what he did for our family was his last opportunity to be generous, and ultimately he capitalized on it.
A lot to unpack there, and we don't have a lot of time, but I appreciate you so much sharing that story. There's a ton of 9/11 stories. I've heard them, you've heard them. But what I love is the generosity you got out of that, and it still lives in your heart today. How can a business take this unbelievable story and generosity and grow?
Sure. So I mentioned earlier that I think about this time in my life, or that time in my life, just about every day. Some days for hours, some days for 5 seconds. On the anniversary of 9/11, I think about it a lot. On the anniversary of my diagnosis as well. Ultimately, as you can see, this is 20 something years ago. I was cured of my cancer, and I went through a lot. And the emotional toll that took on the mind and the body took me years and years to work through. And I bring that up because I think that building a generous mindset and culture is not something that happens overnight. And I often say that generosity is a mindset and not an event. And that indicates that it's something that it does take time to grow and build. And so the way that organizations can use this lesson for growth in their organization is to consider that you need to help people. Not only, you don't just need to give people items and things, or I love big celebrations and I love awards and I love all of the things that a lot of organizations do for people to help them feel recognized, but there's something more to build culture. It's not just about the gifts that you give them, the tangible gifts. It's about setting them up to contribute and be generous themselves. And when people contribute to something bigger than themselves with their own gifts and skills, it creates such an amazing virtuous cycle, because now that not only are they helping other people, they're also feeling as if they're contributing effect to the greater good, and the mission of the organization is extremely powerful. So I have lots of tools and things that I work with organizations with to help them do this. But the simple answer to your question, Steve, is that it takes time, and each organization should have a different mindset and system. It's not as simple as, hey, just do these 10 things and give people stuff and everyone will be happy. It doesn't work like that. It actually takes time to sit there and figure out what an organization and its leadership does best to help build that culture of generosity.
Can any person or company have this generosity mindset?
Yes. And I just alluded to it a moment ago, though. It's not necessarily easy. You know, there's a lot of talk out there about random acts of kindness and random acts of generosity. Fully support those. But it's the intentionality that I believe is extremely important. And so, with that being said, it takes work, it takes time and effort to be intentional about how you want to do it. And so, anyone can do it. And it oftentimes, especially in those early stages where you truly commit to spending time to build that type of culture, it actually does take some effort. I mean, it's not easy. So the answer to your question is yes, but I find a lot of people and leaders end up tripping up and stumbling a little bit because it's not as easy as it may seem. Now, it's fun and can be extremely fulfilling, but you got to stick it out. You got to put the work in.
Tripwires, mindset tripwires. That's what I say, because, and I'm glad you answered it that way, because not everybody's doing it, because we can look out in the world. It's just not happening. So I appreciate you saying that, because I want the audience to know, Bob, you've seen it, I know it because I do it, that there's no special skill, but the skill is to work through the hard times and to keep it in front of mind.
100%. The scientific data shows that most people, in fact, I might even venture a guess that all people have some desire to be giving and generous in their lives. Unfortunately, there's a lot of forces and, like you said, mindset tripwires out there in the world that tell us we're not good enough. We need more. We need another self-help book. We need another podcast. We need a darkness retreat. You know, I mean, there's a million things out there that tell us that we're not capable right now of being a giving person. And I think those are the key tripwires that people need to avoid. Nothing wrong with self-improvement and getting better as you go. But if you're not executing and you're not using what you already have to contribute, you'll never learn how to do it consistently.
Indecisiveness, yes, so well said, Bob. Indecisiveness, and I'll do it tomorrow. Like I say in my monologue, serve today, be generous today. Because you wait till tomorrow, a month goes by and generosity never happens, and you don't get the outlook that you have, Bob, and that I have. And I like to accentuate the point. It's fun. I just helped a guy this morning, spend time with a guy. He's like, oh my God, this is so, I walked out of that meeting like, did I make any money? No. Did I make a new friend? Yeah. Was I extremely happy? Yes. So I really appreciate that. Last, we're coming to the end here. What is one tip to get people to move forward to generosity, that first step?
In your personal life, I think it's working from the inside out, working from inside what you believe and feel is a need in your life and your family. Then it's working with the people close around you. So that could be right inside the home, asking them questions. How can I need, what do you need? How can I be helpful? I think people will be surprised how ungenerous they are outside of holidays and gift giving and birthdays to their family. And then it kind of exudes out into the other pieces of your life, because you get in these habits. You learn the questions to ask. You learn how to read people. You know how there's some people out there who don't admit they need help, and there's other people who are very, very aggressive in asking for help. And you learn the communication skills to understand what people actually need and how you can contribute to them. And I think ultimately you find when you contribute to other people's lives, it comes back around. It shouldn't be expected necessarily, but it's certainly reciprocal in many cases. And in the professional environment, I think the number one thing that leaders can do, and not, to be honest with you, not just leaders, the number one thing that anyone can do in a team organizational environment is make sure that the work that they do considers the work that the other people that they work with or their other colleagues at all times. If you're working in a silo in your organization and you don't feel like you're helping anyone else, or it doesn't really matter what you do and it doesn't affect anyone else around you, it's going to be very, very hard to build a generous workplace culture. It doesn't mean that you're a partner in every process and you don't have work that you have your own systems and agency over, but it means that you realize the work that you're doing and how it contributes to the greater good and assist other people with doing well. I often say that If you feel like you have to take down the person in the cubicle next to you to be recognized in your organization, there's something missing. But if you feel like the assistance that you provide to someone else will help you get recognized and uncover other opportunities for growth and ability to help yourself contribute, then I think you're in a really, really good place. And some people would say you can't say that to your boss. I disagree. I think if you go tell someone, hey, listen, boss, I feel like I can be of assistance to someone else. And a lot of the programs that we have here is I feel like we're competing against each other. I mean, what a powerful statement you could make to someone in leadership. So it doesn't just have to be leaders, but hopefully that answers your question.
It absolutely does. And culture is the big key there. We don't dive into it, but that's eventually you have that great culture and business thrive with that. I like to end with a fun question. So you've got a reservation at a restaurant. It's a tabletop of 4. You occupy one of the seats. Who would be in the other 3 seats, dead or alive? Why? And what food would you order?
Oh my goodness. Well, let's start with the food since I love food. It would be something Italian,
Nice.
which makes me think that I should probably have at least one of my Italian grandparents at the table because we're enjoying Italian food together. So I will say it's either my grandma or my grandpa. I'd love to have them both, but I don't want to take up 2 seats for the purpose of the question. So that's that. Italian food for sure. I mean, we're talking, serious good Italian food too. And then, man, this is a good one. I'm going to go with an athlete. So I'll go Tom Brady. I just admired his work ethic and, his desire to connect with people along the way. I mean, if you've noticed, he was one of the greatest teammates. Obviously, was a great player too, but hard work and humility are two great qualities, I believe. So I'll go with Tom. And then I think I'm going to go with, how about Thomas Jefferson?
Good one.
What do you think? I went out of left field there, but I'm feeling a little political in the so I want to go with the president.
It's August 2024. Voting's coming here soon, so political. But talk about a guy changing the world, Thomas Jefferson. It's like Tom Brady changing the NFL. Thomas Jefferson changed the world. He's a little bigger than Tom, but not too much.
No, but I always appreciated his leadership, what I learned about him. And there's some criticisms of all these people, everyone that I just mentioned, including my grandparents, weren't perfect. But I think sometimes imperfect people have the ability to use their imperfections to learn and grow and teach others. And I feel like the people have done that. And Thomas Jefferson, I always admired his ability to rally the troops, if you will, literally and figuratively.
Yeah, God made us fallible for a reason. I'll just leave it at that. It's so cool.
100%.
Love that table. And I definitely, especially if it's family style, we'll take a 5th seat for me. We're all in, brother. We're all in. Absolutely. So how can people, let's talk real quick about your book and your podcast. Talk about those.
Yeah, bobdipasquale.com. You can find all information on my book there. It's called Personal Finance in a Public World. It harks on my mastery or expertise in the financial world, working there for 15 years. It talks about how social media ads affect our money decisions. Really powerful. It breaks down different topics in personal finance and helps you use technology in a positive fashion. I think sometimes technology gets a bad rap, especially in the financial world. So you can find that on my website, in addition to my podcast, which you can see behind me there. The name of the podcast is Speaking of Impact. So best place to find information on me is at my website. You can also find my social links there.
We'll have all that in the show notes too. And your podcast resembles you to a T, because you're speaking of impact every day and your generosity. And unfortunately, a catastrophic event led to this, but that's the legacy I think 9/11's left for a lot of people, not just you, is, okay, we could take the negative side of this. You took the positive side. Let's learn about generosity. So thank you so much for being a guest on this show. I'm going to ask you back here in the next couple of months, because there's a lot more in generosity we could talk about that I think needs to make an impact in this world. Today, not next year, not next 3 years from now. It's got to happen today, or we're in kind of a little bit of trouble. So thanks again, Bob. Don't forget my TV show, Together We Serve, every Friday at 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern on Roku and Samsung, LG, Apple TV, all those TV streaming services. See my big old head on your 70-inch screen, I always say. But you'll look at the guests more than me, and that'd be a good thing. And me and Bob want to thank you so much for watching and listening to this podcast. I'm sure you'll learn something or inspired or educated or motivated, and we appreciate that. We look forward to seeing you on the next episode of Doing Business with a Servant's Heart. And don't forget to leave feedback on the YouTube channel so I can pass it on to Bob, because I'd love to hear what you guys think. Talk to you soon. Have a great day.